here at Deloitte, we have been looking at the reports of listed companies here in the UK for over 10 years. We look at 100 companies. We try to select a representative sample of the UK market. So looking at different industry, different sizes, and we try to keep it consistent year on year. Let me pick up from 2006, when companies started moving on to IFRS, and we were looking at the very first survey, which already incorporated the IFRS financial statements. If I look at the data then, and I look at the data now, I think the most striking difference is the length of the annual reports. The financial statements themselves, as a result of the move to IFRS, had become considerably more informative, and there is considerably more disclosure, a more comprehensive disclosure around the areas for which we didn't even have any requirements here in the UK before. But if I compare what happened back in 2005 to what we have now, then there is an interesting statistic that is worth mentioning. In, 8 years or so, what we have seen is that the average length of the report has moved from, on average, 85 pages to, on average, 135 pages. So what brought that about? Well, of course, it's the volume of regulations that we had to deal with, a lot of it affecting the front end. Some of it came into the financial statements themselves, and a lot of it was in response to the financial crisis. So, for example, improved disclosure of risks, new standards on financial instruments disclosures, on fair value measurement, on share-based payments. A lot of it came in and brought with it quite a lot of disclosure. So, an interesting direction of travel. And against that, of course, we all still believe that accounts are there to communicate. They're not some sort of pure compliance exercise. They're there to tell a company's story. But how can you tell a story when you have got 135 pages? So companies have been trying to restore that communication principle, and in fact the UK FRC has got a campaign here in the UK to encourage clear and concise reporting. So how are the companies responding to that? Well, first of all, of course, we had the introduction of the strategic report, which aims to do exactly that: improve communications, improve the company's ability to tell a comprehensive, consistent and connected story. Interesting, of course, that 7 companies in our sample this year have said that they have embraced the concepts of integrated reporting, or are on the journey. Of course, integrated report and strategic report, well, kind of sounds very similar. They have that same integrated or connected principle at the heart of it. But what really differentiates them is the fact that integrated report is an outcome of integrated behaviors, processes, governance within the business. It's how you do things, and report just really falls out at the end as the product of that integrated thinking. Another important feature of telling a company's story is actually the use of non-GAAP measures. So companies like to tell their story and tell their story well, and when they do so, quite often they use alternative performance measures, or non-GAAP measures as they are often known. Now, but what is interesting is, of course, what the investors think, because, of course, why do the companies include those numbers in the first instance? To tell their story to the investors. But interestingly, in the recent CFA UK survey, the investors are saying that they didn't trust non-GAAP measures as much as they trust the relevant GAAP numbers. So there is always a lot happening in the field of corporate governance, and the 2012 code is still proving challenging for the companies to comply with. Our survey shows that only 51% of them can state full compliance. Now, that is interesting, particularly in view of the fact that the 2014 code is only around the corner. So next year, companies will have to do better risk reporting, and they will also have to introduce a new viability statement. So one area where companies still have quite a lot of room for improvement is audit committee reporting. In their audit committee reports, companies are supposed to cover some significant issues that they had dealt with during the year and explain how they resolved those. Well, interestingly, only 23% of companies in our survey had provided comprehensive coverage of the risks and issues that had dealt with in the year. So we couldn't talk about corporate governance without covering board diversity. And the picture is looking a little better. For FTSE 100 companies in our sample, the number of women on the board, the percentage of women on the board overall has increased from 21% last year to 24% now. Now that is looking a little healthier and a little bit closer to Lord Davis's recommendation of a quarter of female representation on the board. Last year, of course, was an interesting one. We all had to implement 5 new standards on consolidation. The adoption of IFRS 10, for example, has resulted in the change of the consolidation boundary only for 2 companies in our sample. But in terms of IFRS 11, the story is somewhat different. 42 companies had to look at their relationships very carefully, and for quite a few of them that basically meant that they had to move from proportional consolidation to equity accounting, and a handful of them had to start accounting differently for some of their joint arrangements. Of course, looking ahead, 2015 is the year when the new UK GAAP becomes mandatory, and the companies will have to choose which GAAP they're going to adopt. Is it going to be full IFRS in their individual entity accounts, or are they going to go FRS 101 or FRS 102? Now, in our sample, we had 51 companies that were still using the old UK GAAP in the parent-only accounts. Of course, if they were to use FRS 101, they need to notify their shareholders about their decision to do so, because they would be taking advantage of the reduced disclosure regime. What we have found is that only a handful had given their shareholders an indication which way they're going to go and notified them about their decision to use FRS 101. Now, what about the rest? We do not know. So looking at 2015, there will be a lot to think about with the new Corporate Governance Code and of course the new UK GAAP coming into force. So interesting results perhaps for next year, but what can we say about this year? Well, overall, I think the message is positive, because whilst the reports had got a little bit longer, I think the general quality has improved and companies are striving to tell their story and tell it better. Some of them are embracing the principles of integrated reporting, and some are making a lot of improvements to their strategic report to make it better. So, all the steps in the right direction, but there is clearly still plenty of room for improvement.